Today is the 12th of June, and the house is quiet again. Not peaceful quiet, cold quiet. The kind that settles between two people who used to love loudly, but now only nod in passing. There was a time when mornings meant kisses and shared scripture. Now it's separate routines, separate silences. A marriage held together not by warmth, but by habit. No yelling, no affair, no scandal. Just the slow, painful death of connection. And in that stillness, a question forms in your spirit. Is this what the rest of our life will feel like? But heaven whispers something else. This is not the end. This is the silence before one final flame. Her name is Lisa, a 54-year-old Christian woman from North Carolina, married to Tom for 31 years. They raised 3 kids, served faithfully in church, laughed through lean seasons, prayed through hard ones. But lately, it feels like her husband is only present in body. His eyes drift past her. His responses are clipped. His affection is rare and rehearsed. And Lisa, who once felt like his beloved now, feels more like his roommate. She tried to reignite things. She planned a weekend getaway. He said he was tired. She asked for prayer together. He said he didn't have the words. She tried to start conversations. He changed the subject. And one night, after another meal eaten in mutual silence, Lisa sat on the edge of their bed and said aloud, "God, is my marriage already over just too quiet to notice?" No thunder. No answer. Just the soft rustle of bed sheets as Tom turned away, already halfway asleep. But while the silence from her husband felt deafening, heaven was listening. Archangel Michael stood nearby, unseen by human eyes, not watching passively, but waiting for the moment of surrender. Because heaven doesn't respond to emotional performances. It responds to raw honesty. And Lisa's question wasn't faithless. It was the first step toward restoration. Heaven is preparing something in secret, something called the final flame principle. And it begins here. Before the fire returns to a marriage, both hearts must be stripped of pretense. That means the fake smiles, the forced routines, the unspoken resentment, the daily avoidance. All of it must be laid bare, because God cannot bless what we pretend is whole. So Lisa began small. She stopped pretending. The next morning, when Tom asked, "You good?" she said, "I'm lonely." And it stunned him. Not because it was rude, but because it was real. He didn't know what to say. Just nodded, quiet. But something moved in the atmosphere. Because heaven responds when honesty re-enters a house. Lisa then walked into her prayer room, closed the door, and whispered, "God, I don't want a marriage that simply survives. I want to feel chosen again." And the presence of God met her there, gentle, firm, fierce in its compassion. And she heard it not audibly, but deep in her soul. "Then prepare your heart. I'm lighting something new." You who are listening, if your marriage is cold, if love feels like a memory instead of a current, you are not hopeless. You are not beyond repair. And you are not alone in this silence. Because even now, heaven is preparing the first spark. And in part 2, Archangel Michael will reveal the first step you must take to make space for that flame. Because this marriage is not dead. It's dormant. And God knows how to wake what the world forgot. Lisa didn't know what she was expecting. After 31 years of marriage, the idea of change felt naive. Still, something in her heart wouldn't die. A small flicker, a memory of warmth, a whisper that not all cold things are meant to stay frozen. That morning after her prayer, she lit a candle beside her Bible. Not because it was part of a ritual, but because she needed to believe that something in her life could burn again. Archangel Michael was already present, standing near as heaven prepared her for the next step in the final flame principle. And this one wasn't about her husband. It was about her. Michael called it the reclaimed radiant step. Because before fire returns to a marriage, it must first be relit in the individual soul. Lisa had lost sight of herself. She used to laugh loud, dance in the kitchen, write poetry, wear perfume just because it made her feel alive. But now, she wore gray, listened more than she spoke, shrank to make room for Tom's emotional withdrawal. She had become someone who only existed in service of the home, but no longer felt at home in herself. Michael whispered, "Before a man can see his wife again, she must see herself." So Lisa made a quiet vow. Each day, she would do one thing that reminded her she was still alive. Not for Tom, not to provoke attention, but to honor the woman God still adored. She started small. She played the old worship song she used to cry to in college. She put on red lipstick and stared at herself until she no longer looked foreign. She pulled out her old journal and wrote, "God, show me who I am beneath the disappointment." And slowly, a softness returned. Not loud, not desperate, but divine. Here is the second step Archangel Michael asks of you. Reclaim your radiance, not to seduce, but to remind your spirit that it is still sacred. This is not about changing your looks. This is about removing the invisible ashes that grief, neglect, and years of silence have layered over your light. Because even the most faithful spouse can't see what you've stopped revealing. Lisa didn't bring it up to Tom. She didn't force deep talks. She just began carrying a new atmosphere. One evening, she sang while folding laundry. He looked up, not because the singing was new, but because it sounded like joy. He hadn't heard that in a long time. He watched her for a moment, then went back to his phone. But something was shifting, and heaven smiled. Because this is how God works. He ignites a hidden wick before setting the whole room ablaze. You who feel like your marriage has become a long hallway with no open doors, start here. Not with confrontation, but with quiet reclamation. Light your own fire again, and let the warmth do the talking. Michael says, the final flame doesn't start with both. It starts with one. One who dares to remember that she is still desirable first to heaven and then to earth. That night, Lisa whispered a prayer over her sleeping husband. God, reteach him how to see me. But first teach me how to stand in the light again. And with that, the room grew warm. Not from romance, but from heaven beginning its work. Lisa was changing. Not in ways Tom could always name, but in ways that quietly unsettled the cold routine they'd both settled into. She moved differently, not with bitterness, not with resentment, but with quiet dignity. And that was new. Because before, Lisa's silence was the silence of surrender. Now, it was the silence of a woman reclaiming internal sacredness. The third step in the final flame principle came as Lisa stood at the kitchen window, watching the wind stir the trees. Michael whispered it clearly. The embers of love reignite when the air becomes safe again. Heaven calls it the sanctuary atmosphere shift. Because before love returns to a cold marriage, the house must become holy again. Lisa began praying aloud in the morning. Not dramatic prayers, just declarations of peace. Lord, make this house soft again. Make this home holy ground. And it started changing the air. She turned off the news. She played instrumental worship music. She placed a sticky note above the sink that read, Peace lives here. Healing lives here. Hope breathes again here. It seemed silly at first, but within days, she noticed something strange. The heaviness that had settled over their home began to lift. Tom no longer lingered in the garage as long. He sat at the table longer after dinner. He even asked about her day without looking at his phone. Atmosphere matters, because the spirit of the home either invites reconnection or repels it. Archangel Michael said, a husband who feels emotionally numb will often return to warmth before he returns to words. And Lisa was learning that her job was not to force conversation, but to cultivate an atmosphere so undeniably kind that even a weary man would notice. She found herself humming again while folding laundry. She blessed Tom under her breath when he walked by, saying, "God, soften his spirit. Return his gaze to me." And one day, after nearly a month of quiet shifts, Tom looked at her while she was organizing the pantry and said, "You've been peaceful lately." Lisa turned and smiled. "I finally stopped fighting the cold. I just started lighting candles." He didn't respond, but something in his expression softened. This is the third truth for those walking through cold marriages. You don't have to fix him, but you do have to fix the air. Because no flame can grow in a suffocating atmosphere, and the home must breathe again before the heart can. Your action step? Walk through your house tonight and bless each room. Out loud. Yes, really. Not religiously, but relationally. God, let laughter return here. God, remove tension from this hallway. God, let this kitchen hold joy again. God, restore the bedroom to intimacy and rest. Speak it, claim it, because your words invite angels to act. Lisa stood in the doorway of their bedroom one night and whispered, "This is not a grave. This is still a garden." And with those words, heaven moved again, because love needs oxygen, and atmosphere creates space for breath and flame. In the next part, Archangel Michael will reveal the most unexpected part of restoration: vulnerability that reintroduces the heart without demanding an answer. Because the final flame does not appear in control, it arrives through courage. The fourth step wasn't something Lisa expected, because by now she had grown used to the slow reordering of her inner life. She'd reclaimed her identity. She'd reset the atmosphere. She'd even begun to feel beautiful again, not from compliments, but from alignment with heaven. But Archangel Michael whispered something unexpected. "Now you must reintroduce your heart." And Lisa felt the fear creep in. "But what if I open up and he still doesn't respond?" Michael was gentle but firm. The final flame does not ignite in safety. It ignites in sacrifice. This is the fourth principle in the final flame system. Holy vulnerability precedes intimacy. Tom hadn't asked for any of the changes Lisa had made. He noticed them, sure, even respected them, but he hadn't spoken about the distance, hadn't named the silence, hadn't initiated a conversation that mattered. And that made this next step even more terrifying. But Lisa knew what Michael was asking. Not a confrontation, but an invitation. So she waited until the kids were gone and the house was still. She lit one candle, made a simple dinner. No pressure, no music, just warmth. When Tom sat down at the table, she looked him in the eyes and said, "I miss you." He blinked. She didn't accuse, didn't explain, didn't cry. She simply let the words hover between them like incense. He set down his fork. "I'm here." She nodded. "But I don't feel you." He swallowed hard. And she saw it, the flicker. That look he used to have when he wanted to reach for her but didn't know how. She didn't ask him for answers. She just told her truth. "I know we're older. I know life's been hard, but I need you to know I haven't stopped loving you. Even in the quiet, even in the cold, I've just been waiting." Tom stared at the flickering flame between them, and he whispered, "I didn't think you still did." Lisa smiled through wet lashes. "I didn't know I did until I started looking for it again." This is what vulnerability does. It doesn't demand a breakthrough. It creates space for it. Michael whispered, "You cannot expect resurrection in a place you've abandoned emotionally. To reawaken the flame, you must be willing to risk not being met equally, at least at first, because the soul remembers when it is spoken to gently." Tom's didn't need a sermon. He didn't need therapy in that moment. He needed a safe place to feel again, and Lisa's vulnerability gave him that. You who are listening, don't mistake silence for finality. Don't mistake the cold for a curse. The truth is, your marriage may only be waiting for one heart to speak first. And when it does, you may find that the other heart was just waiting for permission to thaw. Your action step? Write the words you've been too afraid to say. and speak them gently. Not all at once, not with emotional force, just enough for heaven to use them. I'm still here. I miss what we had. I'm ready to try again. I believe God can still work in us. These are not demands. They are invitations. And heaven works best through invitation. That night, Lisa stood at the kitchen sink, and Tom came up behind her. No words, just a hand resting lightly on her shoulder. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. In the next and final part, Archangel Michael will reveal the fire's true form, not just as affection, but as covenant reborn, because love doesn't just reignite in feeling. It rises through promise. The morning didn't begin with fireworks. No dramatic confession. No weeping embrace. No sudden transformation. Just stillness. But this time, the stillness felt different. It didn't feel like distance. It felt like space. Sacred space where something new could be born. Lisa woke early. She didn't rush to cook. Didn't busy herself. She just sat at the edge of the bed and breathed. And Tom, without being asked, sat beside her. Not out of duty, but choice. This is what the final flame looks like. Not loud, not cinematic, but holy. Because when heaven restores what we thought was dead, it does not always come with flashes of fire. Sometimes it comes with a whisper and a choice. The fifth and final truth Archangel Michael gave is this: flame that returns without covenant will burn out again. He called it the covenant rekindling step, because emotional connection is fragile. Physical affection is fleeting. But a marriage sealed by renewed promise, that is something heaven guards. Lisa turned to Tom and spoke the words God had been preparing in her heart for weeks. I don't want just a warmer marriage. I want a holy one. He looked at her, really looked. The veil was thinner now. She could see emotion behind his steady eyes. And then he said something she hadn't heard in years. Do you want to pray? She didn't cry. She simply nodded. They took each other's hands. Not like strangers. Not like survivors. But like partners in covenant. And Lisa whispered, God, we give this marriage back to you. Not just the broken parts, but the parts we stopped believing in. We don't want a second chance. We want a new foundation. Michael stood close. Heaven drew near. And the angels rejoiced because what was cold had been set ablaze, not by willpower, but by God's design. Here's what you need to know now. Your marriage may never look the way it did in the beginning. But maybe that's the point. Because God isn't calling you to return to the first fire. He's preparing you for the final flame. This flame is not about butterflies. It's not about perfect communication or endless romance. This flame is about choosing each other again in sacred silence, holding hands when words aren't enough, praying when your heart still aches, saying I see you when the world grows loud, and remembering that your vows weren't poetry, they were prophecy. Your final action step? Write a new covenant. Yes, write it. Together, if your spouse is ready, or alone, if they are not yet. A promise to God, not just to stay married, but to build sacred space where heaven can dwell. God, we promise to let you define love again, to rebuild, not just cope, to become more than survivors, to become vessels of your glory in this house. That morning, Lisa and Tom said, Amen, with hands still entwined. They didn't know all the answers, but they had a flame again. Small, quiet, but alive, and heaven called it holy. This is your reminder, dear listener. Your marriage is not beyond reach. Your home is not too cold, and your heart is not forgotten, because even now, heaven is preparing one final flame, and it is not the end. It's the beginning of something sacred,